Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in the morning, Tuesday morning, January 25th, and I'm happy to be here. This is Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and we're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. I did put the link into the chat room that I wanted to look at this morning, and this is from Healthy Place, www.healthyplace.com. It's an article called "How Does Physical Abuse Impact a Child?" And I wanted to read through there, and there's quite a bit of information there. Healthyplace.com has some pretty good information about abuse, so you can check that website out at www.healthyplace.com and just look for the abuse topics, right? And I'm glad to be here, be able to do these shows. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it. I've done like 558 shows or something, and I have a lot of people who tune in and follow what I'm doing, and I thank you so much for taking the time to do that, because it's a lot of shows to keep up with, right? So thank you so much. And I'm not a counselor or therapist. I say this on every show. It's really important for people to know, and anybody who's might listen for the first time, just maybe wouldn't know. And so I want people to know that I'm just a private citizen paying to do my shows. I'm not a counselor or therapist or anything like that. And I'm talking about abuse, which is a sensitive subject. So it can bother people. It can trigger survivors. It's a sensitive, touchy subject, and so you have to know ultimately what is good for you to listen to, right? So you have to listen at your own discretion. If you feel the show might bother you or the topic information might bother you, please don't listen to the show. You just have to listen at your own discretion. And if you think it'll bother you, just turn the channel or turn it off, or go listen to something else, because you want to be comfortable and safe when you're listening to information like this, because abuse is it's a harsh topic, and I lived my life like this, so I don't mind talking about it. But I really didn't like being abused, let me tell you that. But I don't mind talking about it. It's been my whole life, so I've experienced some good things too. But in the meantime, I've had to deal with this whole aftermath of living after abuse, right? And so it's just part of my life, right? So I don't mind talking about it, but I know a lot of people find it very hard to listen to. So just make sure that you're okay with listening to it, and if not, then it's ultimately your discretion to turn off to do something else, right? Young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my shows, because there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and I just believe in protecting children at all times. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and we're standing up, we're working every day to save children's lives. We're doing what we can, right? And so, and to teach people, how to protect themselves, young people, children, and whatnot. If you don't know how to protect yourself online, get the information just by typing into your browser, internet safety, online safety for children, things like this, right? It'll bring you to websites that'll help you, give you some tips on how to keep yourself safe online, right? Because whenever there's a chat room present, you need to be very careful. You do not want to be a victim of a child sexual predator, believe you me. So keep yourself safe and keep your friends safe and keep everybody safe around you, and learn how to stay safe online, right? So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll get right into this particular article. I've been looking at this for a while, and I pulled up a whole bunch of information on physical child abuse, right? And I was looking around to see what was written about it, and it's almost all the same material out there that you see, with the effects of physical abuse and what it does to as far as physiological, effects to the body, as well as to the brain, and then as well as to the emotional state of a child, right, and the emotional well-being of a child. So many issues because of child physical abuse. And this particular article is quite interesting. How does physical abuse impact a child? From www.healthyplace.com. So I'm going to read through here. It was written by a staff writer. They don't even give the person's name who wrote it, but it was written in 2008. But it doesn't matter because it's good info. And I just, it's quite interesting. They sort of draw attention to a few things that I think are really something that people who are adult survivors of child physical abuse, of child abuse of any kind, really, but this is about child physical abuse. What happens to them and what happens to their whole being, you know what I mean? It's absolutely horrific. And this child physical abuse is horrible, you know what I mean? I survived it, and I know so many kids don't survive it. That's the headlines roll in every day from children who have been killed and murdered at the hands of their parents, because they've been physically abused or, just beaten too badly, and they die in the hospital due to the abuse-related injuries, or they're burned, or whatever the parents or caregivers are doing, to abuse their children, that kills them physically, right? It's absolutely horrific. And I pulled up a whole bunch of information, and I live with the flashbacks of this all the time. It's not something that just goes away. I mean, I know what happened to me, and it's very sad what children go through, and you have to deal with their later on in life. You know what I mean? My whole thing was that I didn't really reach out and get any help. I didn't even start my own journey, my own healing journey, until 4 years ago, and so I'm 4 years on the other side of this, right? So, which is great, because before that I was having a real hard time with flashbacks and nightmares and just real issues because of the abuse that I suffered. So it's harsh, but I want to read through here and then just kind of talk about what they had to say about this. I've read this article before, and but I haven't actually covered it on my morning shows. I usually cover this stuff on my evening shows or on Dreamcatchers for abused children. So I wanted to kind of take a look at it and really talk about my own situation and other kids that I knew, which I won't mention names, who were abused, right? Yeah, absolutely horrific. And so that's what we're going to talk about this morning and probably through the week. It's a pretty long article. We'll see how far we can get through here. But this particular staff writer at healthyplace.com said child abuse can result in long-term physical, emotional, and social disabilities. And the longer physical abuse of a child occurs, the more serious the impact. Physical abuse can have long-term effects on a child's health and development. It can cause physical injury, brain damage, or disability, and may lead to children developing emotional, behavioral, or educational problems. For some children, these difficulties can continue in adulthood. For example, people who were physically abused as children may have problems with personal relationships, and they may be more likely to treat their own children abusively. That's just passing on the cycle of abuse, right? Which is what my parents did, right? My parents were both abused as children, physically and in other ways, and not treated well as children, and so they just passed the cycle on, right? And that's the problem. That's the real issue with abuse. It's a huge issue, and it just should never happen. It's just sad that many people think that physical abuse, they think that it's discipline, right? That what they're doing to their children is discipline, and it's quite sad that parents don't know the difference between abuse and discipline, right? Because there's a real difference, right? If an inaction or an action that hurts or harms a child, that's what abuse is, right? So any inaction or action that hurts or harms a child is considered to be abuse, especially if it's with intent, right? So when a parent's physically battering their child, and they know that they're hurting their child, and they can see the marks, they can see the wounds that they're inflicting on their child's body, right? Not to mention the emotional effects and the psychological damage done because of the beatings, right, which is a serious issue. The parents, they're not thinking about that. They're not thinking about the fact that they've just beaten their child senseless, possibly knocked their child unconscious, or near unconscious, right, which is what my mom used to do. The welts and the bruises and the marks, from the beating, whatever type of implement was used. They know they're hurting their children, but in the back of their mind, they're so angry or whatever, for whatever reason, are lashing out at their children. Usually it's anger involved. When your parent is battering their child like that, beating on their child, it's generally because the child has done something that's made them mad, and so of course the anger comes into play. So then it's not discipline anymore. Once it becomes anger and it becomes a bloody battle, a bloody beating, it's no longer about discipline. It's about a parent hurting that child and saying, I'm going to hurt you for doing what you did, right? Instead of a parent really sitting back and taking a breather, allowing the child to take a breather and then saying, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to, you've misbehaved, you've done something I don't approve of. I'm tired, let's sit down and talk about this. And if the child's too young to understand that stuff, then you just need to set them down someplace, have a timeout chair or a timeout thing where they have to go to bed and to have a nap if they misbehave, right? And if they don't want to do that, there's other ways to handle it. You can sit there and just hold them. And if they're throwing a tantrum, they're throwing a tantrum. If a child's throwing a tantrum, beating them will not help, right? They certainly don't deserve that. Children will throw tantrums and they will do things that will, make their parents angry and their caregivers angry, but it's not the child's fault. You know what I mean? They're just children, right? It's the adult's fault in the situation because they can't handle what's going on. And so the adults really are the ones who are responsible to do the right thing by their children, right? Because I know it's hard. Parents, I'm sure it's so stressful for parents. I'm not a parent. I lost my baby halfway through it. But I've seen other kids that, you just think, oh, man, settle down, little buddy. But the thing is beating on them, burning them, stabbing them, throwing them against walls, choking them, shaking them is definitely not the answer. It won't solve anything, and it won't teach the child anything but shame and rage, fear, and just how to hate their parents, right? So this whole issue of child physical abuse has always bothered me extremely. It really bothers me because I watched my family. I watched, first of all, my dad physically abuse my mother. I watched my mother in turn physically abuse my dad because she was retaliating for the abuse that he was putting on her. So anytime he wasn't looking, she would catch him in the back of the head with something. Like, as soon as he would be off guard, then she would be like, aha, I'll get you, right? So she'd smack him with something like frying pans, dishes, cups of coffee, whatever she could do to try to get back at him, right? Because he was abusive to her. So I watched my dad physically abuse my siblings, which is my brothers that were in the home at the time when I was growing up, which there was only I had 4 brothers, but there were 3 in the home when I was growing up because one had moved out when I was born, right around the time I was born. So I watched my dad physically abuse my brothers, which included like going in to their bedroom with a belt and just beating on them and calling them names and cursing them, beating on them, kicking them, dragging them around, punching them out. Just basically just bashing them around, you know what I mean? And I was a victim of that myself. My dad was physically abusive to me as well, usually with beatings with a belt or with his fist or stick, like this big stick outside. One time he grabbed it and beat me with it. Normally it was his belt or just his fist, right? My mom, however, loved to beat her children with whatever she could get her hands on. So my mom was one of these people that whatever was nearby, that's what you were going to get beaten with. And if there was nothing nearby, then it would be her fist or, whatever. She was a very physically abusive woman. And my mom was my main abuser. So, excuse me, most of the physical abuse I suffered was at the hands of my mother. And it's incredibly harsh what it does to children. It's a horrible thing. Watching your family be abused, if you have siblings and whatnot. I had a sister and a brother who had moved out before I was born, or right about the time I was born, and then there were that left 6 of us in the home, right? So I was watching my 3 brothers and one of my sisters and myself being abused, right? And it's absolutely, or 5 of us that left 5 in the home. That's right, because there were 7 of us. But it's absolutely horrific, and it was a horrible situation because I would witness the abuse, and especially if my dad would come in the room and start hitting on my brother, like slapping him around, calling him names, and kicking him, because my dad loved to kick my brother for some reason. I don't know what it was, but my dad just hated my brother Rob, and that's the one who committed suicide because he's the one that my brother's the one who the authorities had noted that. The school, actually. He was, my dad had beaten him up and he went to school with, my mom put him in a turtleneck in the middle of the summer in the desert in New Mexico. And the teachers, of course, noted bruises on his face. They took him to the nurse. They checked him out. And of course, he had been beaten up, right? So my brother said he was afraid to go home because he was afraid of my dad, right? And so the authorities got involved and they brought my parents up, both of them, on charges of child abuse, right? So they had to go to court, and my brother, because he was the one who I guess got my dad in trouble, even though he didn't really rat my dad out. I mean, the teachers just noticed bruises, and he was wearing a turtleneck in the summertime. But you don't wear a turtleneck in New Mexico in the summertime, man. It's too hot. It's 105 degrees in the summertime Fahrenheit, and you would never see a child in a turtleneck, right? And so, the authorities got involved, and so my dad, of course, hated my brother because of that, and he already hated him anyway because that's why he had been beating on him, right? For some reason, my dad just picked on him, and I think it's because he was weak. He was the weak one, right? And my brother Chess used to try to protect him, and my brother Howard was one of the younger brothers, underneath of Rob. So he got some of the abuse too, but it was mainly Rob who was abused physically by my dad, and Chess as well. And then later, when Rob moved out, then of course it was Howard, right? My dad would just pick on whoever was next in line, sort of thing. And then it was me, because once my brother moved out, it was me. So, yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous that parents think that that by controlling the situation in the family, that by using physical force and physical violence, that they'll get something done or something accomplished, or, mainly it's because my dad was like schizophrenic, he's psychologically, mentally ill, right? And, just didn't know how to deal with his children, didn't know how to handle his children, and he didn't know any other way himself other than to be the manly man and start kicking the crap out of his kids and his wife, right? Which is just absolutely ridiculous and horrible, but it happens. So many people, just sat back and watched it and said nothing, right? Whereas I used to speak up, and I didn't like how my dad was treating my brother, and I'd be like, you leave my brother alone. And of course, because my dad was beating on my brother and I would try to stick up for my brother, then my dad would slap me around. I remember a couple of times being choked on the couch and slapped, and a couple of serious physical abuse episodes with my dad where he'd drag me drag me through the living room by my leg, because I didn't want to go to the bedroom because he was going to beat me with his belt, and I knew it. And so he had me by my leg, and I was actually grabbing onto furniture as he was dragging me along the floor. And I grabbed onto a corner of the wall, and he pulled me around, and it ended up really damaging my hip, which is still damaged today. The doctors have taken a look, in different various points in my life, have seen the actual damage, and they said it was really old, and I said yes, it was. It was from a long time ago, and I knew where it was from. And the issue is, did my dad stop because I was injured? No, he threw me on the bed and began to beat me with his belt, right? My parents did not care that they hurt us, right? They did not take us to the doctor. They did not attempt to make good what they did. They thought it was perfectly justifiable to hurt their children and do whatever they want to their children, all in the name of discipline, right? And so it's absolutely horrible what this does to people. And, that's, so many people have gone through this. And I know so many people, I knew so many kids myself growing up who were abused, and the people would say, well, how do you know the difference between abuse and discipline, right? But when for instance, I had this little friend who lived across the street, and I won't name names, but he was a young boy, and he was a couple years younger than me, and we grew up together, so he was quite small. He was younger than me. And his dad used to just punch the crap out of him in the front yard with everybody looking, and really just pummel his poor little body for something that he would do. Like, let's say he would get into an argument or a fight with his younger brother. His dad would physically beat on him. And, we're talking a serious beating, like an adult would be beating up another adult. That's how he would beat on his son. And I was witnessing this at home, see. And so I knew the difference between abuse and discipline, right? Absolutely horrific, you know what I mean? Because I knew other kids that were being abused as well. And so it's just absolutely horrible, because it's not only the physical damage done to the body, it's what happens to the child's mind, right? And so that's what I kind of wanted to take a look here at what they said about this, right? We'll just continue on through the article here, and it says that impact of physical abuse. An abused child may experience one or more of the following: hitting, shaking, choking, biting, kicking, punching, burning, poisoning, suffocating, or being held underwater. Physical abuse may lead to bruises, cuts, welts, burns, fractures, internal injuries, or in the most extreme cases, death, right? And so many children are killed because of physical abuse, internal bleeding, head injuries and whatnot are mainly what we see out there in the headlines at Dream Catchers for Abused Children, right? Absolutely horrific. I know what it's like to have my head slammed into walls. And let me tell you what, it's extremely scary when you're a young child and your head is being slammed into walls, because you could die from that. And when I was really little and my parents would slam my head into the wall, either one of them, they were both responsible for that, throw me across the room, and of course you hit the wall and bounce off, and it's very painful. And you're thinking, oh my God, you could die, But when I was a little kid, I was actually kind of wishing for death, because I was in so much pain in every way, physically, emotionally, psychologically, right? I was actually wishing for death. So, I wasn't necessarily all that, I was kind of thinking one of these times they're going to hit me hard enough in the head, and it'll end it all. It'll end my suffering. And I was under 10 years old when I was thinking like that. That's why this is how serious dysfunction and abuse, this is how serious it is for kids when there's no normalcy in the home, right? All of a sudden, children can't be children in that, right? I mean, I still used to play with my toys. I had some toys, right? But my toys would generally get me beaten because if I did something like made a mess with them, or let's say if I broke one of my toys, my mother was right on top of it because my mom was really there looking for any excuse to beat on me because she was my main abuser and she was a stay-at-home mother when I was little. And so any, toys were not necessarily, the best thing for me because it generally ended up in a beating because of my toys. Or if once in a while we'd have a friend over. I wasn't allowed to have very many kids over, but there was a couple of families that actually trusted my parents to look after their children, which my mom was fine looking after other people's children. She would not hurt other people's children. Like, she was very good to other people's children. But she hated her own children. And the reason why my parents were so bad to their own children is because they hated each other. Right? My mom hated my dad, and I was born out of marital rape, so my mother was looking at me the whole time like, I was just a piece of crap to her, right? And that's the truth. And she made it very clear to me that she hated my guts because I was born out of rape and she did not want me, and that she was stuck with me and that I should have died, and this is the stuff she would tell me, right? She wouldn't just tell it to me. She'd be screaming at me, you should have died, or I should have killed you years ago. That's what she used to say. She loved to say that one, and of course it hurts your feelings, Like, I'd be sitting there standing there in the kitchen, against the wall thinking, oh, Jesus, it's going to be bad. I know it, because as soon as my mom would start screaming and cursing at me, I could pretty much generally tell there'd be a physical beating involved. I'd be like, hearing this, my mom saying, I should have killed you years ago, as the belt's coming down or as her fists are coming down or, as she's kicking me, right? And I'm thinking, well, why didn't you? Go ahead. So then my attitude became, go ahead, kill me. I don't mind. I don't care. You'd be helping me. You'd be doing me a favor, And that's the sad part about this kind of stuff, right? It's so harsh that so many kids out there probably are going through this right now, and so, especially if the abuse just continues on, and there's so much psychological damage as well. And the abuse just gets worse and worse, and then eventually the child just feels like, well, yeah, go ahead and kill me. I don't care. You'd be doing me a favor, man. And that's really sad. That is so incredibly sad. And but I did feel that way for a long time. And then I got older and kind of took on a new behavior, which was that, no, I did count, and I did want to have a good life. But it was hard for me. It took me another 20 years to start my healing journey, really, from the point where I started at the age of 21, where I started to try to change my life around, stop doing drugs, and start taking care of myself, and stop trying to kill myself, really. It took me another 20 years, right? So that just tells you the length of time involved, and especially for people who don't get help, I didn't trust counselors and therapists. I didn't trust anybody, really. And so, for me to go to a counselor or therapist in my 20s and 30s just wouldn't have happened. Now, because I've talked to some counselors and therapists, I'm thinking, yeah, there's got to be some good ones out there. There has to be some decent ones out there that actually do care. So, I'm more inclined now that I would go and talk to one than I was before, for sure. But it's horrific when parents are kicking the crap out of you and then telling you they wish that you had died or that they should have killed you. And my mother used to love to say that. And she was just so horrific, and then she would sit back. She would never cry and say, oh, look what I've done to my daughter, after she beat me to a bloody mess, She'd just be like, she'd go and sit down at the table and feel completely justified, smoke a cigarette while leaving me there, laying there in my pool of blood. You know what I mean? Absolutely horrific. She was a horrible woman. I detailed a lot of this stuff in my book, A Life of Death and Redemption, and it's pretty graphic, and I wanted people to know the truth. I didn't want to sugarcoat it, because a lot of times, people don't want to talk about the horrors of really being abused, And this is pretty graphic what I'm talking about here today. So please, if it's too graphic and you really feel like, you just can't listen to the show, you really need to turn it off, like now, right? Because it is your discretion. You have to listen at your own discretion. But I'm talking about the real impacts of child abuse, physical child abuse, right? And I mean, that's to watch my own blood fly across the room. You know what I mean? Like, my mother was uh slapping me so hard one time when I was just a kid. I was 10 years old, and she was backhanding me like a, I call it bitch slap, right? And forward slapping and backhanding, right? Like bitch slapping, right? That's what they call it. Some people do. And she had both my wrists, and so I couldn't protect myself. And she was so angry and so pissed off, and she didn't she hurt me. That's the whole issue. She had rings on, so she was cutting my cheek as well as she had split my lip, and blood was my nose so hard that my blood was pouring out of my nose, right? And so every time she'd slap me, blood would fly across the room onto the wall, right? And then she'd slap me the other way, and it would go on the carpet, you know. And then before you knew it, it was everywhere. I mean, my God, you know, because she wasn't stopping. She was going to beat me till either I passed out or she just finally had enough of her own satisfaction of getting me. Yeah, you know, it's like, oh, I showed her. You know what I mean? Because my mother had a hate on for me, right? A real hate on, right? A lot of people have a hard time understanding that because they have these mothers who love them and care about them and treat them with dignity and respect, right? But my mother treated me like a dog, right? I mean, she didn't treat me with any dignity or respect, right? And she hated my guts, right? So the whole issue is that, you know, it's bad, like when you're 10 years old and you see your own blood flying around. And the whole issue is that I almost passed out. I didn't quite pass out. She slapped me to the ground, finally, let me go. And I went to the ground and I just stayed down because I didn't want to look at her because I thought, oh, Jesus, she's going to continue to kick me around. So she left the room and I got up to go to the bathroom because blood was just everywhere. I was trying to cup it in my hand and it was just pouring out of my nose. And I thought, Jesus, I'm going to die, right? And so I couldn't get the blood to stop. Nobody was going to help me. So finally my sister came in to try to help me get the bleeding to stop. And the blood was all over the bathroom by this time. And I had just been ravaged. My face had been completely ravaged. And, you know, I looked in the mirror and almost threw up because it didn't look like me. I was just beaten to rat shit. And so I was so angry. Finally, you know, the blood kept pouring and it really wouldn't stop for a long time. But I went out into the living room and I said, why don't you just go ahead and kill me? I'm dead anyway. So my mom came back for round 2 with a belt and beat the crap out of me in the bathroom with a belt. In the meantime, I'm still bleeding, so there was blood. It was a bloody mess, you know. And just to see your own parents spill your own blood, I mean, you know, she had done that more than one occasion, right? But that was one of the worst beatings I had taken from her. And it's also the one that did the most damage to me psychologically as well. You know, I have issues with, you know, not blood, but just knowing that my mother could do that to me, you know what I mean? That parents could do that to their children. And it's absolutely horrific, you know. I'm going to continue on talking about this week, so it's a very graphic subject because what I'm talking about is my own story and not just quote-unquote educational material about child physical abuse. I'm actually spelling it out, how I felt, what it did to me, you know, the actual what was taking place and the horrors of it, because that's the horrors of it. You know what I mean? Like, she literally had killed my spirit that day. I had already been feeling pretty much dead before that, but then on that day I recognized the fact that I really did feel dead and I was dead. And so I was just a walking dead. You know, my spirit had been killed. And this was from a woman who I used to try to protect and who really, you know, I used to go and steal flowers in the gardens around in the neighbors' gardens and bring flowers home for my mother and draw her little cards and tell her I loved her. And then she would beat me like this and call me names. And, you know, she called me a whore and a slut and a cunt. And, you know, she wouldn't say, oh, you're a cunt. She was screaming at me, you know, and beating on me. You're a whore. You're a slut. You know, I'll kill you. She says, I'll kill you. You know, and she did. She literally killed me. She killed my spirit. You know, she didn't kill me and put me in a body bag, but she killed me, my inside. She killed my heart. She killed my spirit. She killed my mind, right? And it took me a long, long time to get that back. And I'm still working on it. But I have a lot of it back. But the thing compared to what I was before, which was a walking shell. And the whole issue is most people don't care, so they never bothered to pay much attention in my family. So, well, they didn't care because they weren't being beaten like that, but they were being abused, right? So it's a huge issue. But we'll continue on with this tomorrow morning. So it's very graphic. So if it makes you uncomfortable, you don't have about tuning in for the next few days because this is what we're going to talk about. And thanks everybody for tuning in. I do appreciate everybody who's listening to my shows and being here with on my journey with me. And I'll be back on to Dreamcatcher Radio, blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. Right, I'll be back on there tonight at 9 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an hour covering the headlines. Right. Have a great day, everybody. You know, do not ever give up. I'm so glad I did not give up. So I'm telling you, that's why I'm doing these shows. Never, ever, ever give up. I don't care how hard the going is going. You go and you just keep going because there's better days ahead, people. I'm telling you, there's better days ahead, but there won't be if you don't stick around to experience them. So stick around, right? Have a great day, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.